Hi, I'm Christopher Legier, graduate student, Houston Baptist University, Masters of Arts in Psychology. Today what I want to talk about is the COVID-19 pandemic, and the issue I want to focus on is one of social distancing. So what is the definition of social distancing? Well, according to the American Psychological Association, social distancing is the degree to which, psychologically speaking, a person or group wants to remain separate from other members of different groups. So what does that mean for us today in this day and age? Well, what social distancing means for us is we are practicing social distancing in the COVID-19 pandemic as a way of preventing disease and the spread of that disease. So one of the most effective ways we can do this is through social distancing by remaining 6 feet apart from others. We can also take precautions to wear masks and other PPE or personal protective equipment. So what are some of the psychological effects of social distancing? Well, human beings by nature are social creatures. We require and we seek physical contact, or we like to be in the proximity of one another as far as the way we were made and the way that we were developed. So what is social distancing doing to us, and how is it affecting our human growth and development? Well, for one, social distancing, or the COVID-19 pandemic, I should say, has already pushed us to the point that we were heading anyway. We were already social distancing in terms of, as far as work goes, more and more people were starting to telecommute to work, working online. As far as learning goes, instead of being in classrooms, students, especially at the collegiate level, were already taking online classes. Another thing I will circle back to, job training. A lot of job training, different certifications and things that you need were able to be done online and not have to be in one physical setting around different groups of people. So the COVID-19 pandemic, what it did was it accelerated, in a sense. What it did was we were already beginning the social distance, but it increased it twofold, threefold. So what has been the effects? Let's look at it real quick. The effects upon children, adolescents and preteens, and even grammar school kids. Well, one thing about social distancing that it has done is that kids need to be in a classroom setting, because not only does school serve a purpose of where you learn different intellectual skills, you also learn emotional skills. It helps you develop an emotional intelligence. And it's hard for someone to develop emotional intelligence if they're isolated from others, or if they're around the same people day in and day out, whether it's family members, close friends, or other types of relatives or people in your life. You have to get out and meet different people from different groups in order to develop a long-term EQ. Another thing is according to the University of Chicago, parents are really concerned about their kids as far as this last 2 years go. They feel like their kids are 1.5 years and 2 years behind. And like I said, with the University of Chicago, the School of Public Policy found that this is to be a valid concern of parents, because not only have kids begun to suffer as far as not being around others, but their learning has also suffered, because there is no substitute, psychologically speaking, for an actual teacher that's both tactically and technically proficient in their skills and able to explain something to you, not just online or through some type of social distancing method, but actually face to face, being within the proximity of others. That helps you develop that emotional intelligence. And it's something to be said about reading other people's faces to know the social cues. That's another thing that we are suffering from, because the social cues are gone with social distancing. So what is the difference between, when we talk about social distancing, as far as whether it's learning or far as going to a school or work or anything? What we find is that most of us are digital consumers. And what that means is that we will do things online as far as social media, where it could be Facebook, Twitter, or even the newest thing as far as TikTok. But in order to transition over to being a digital learner, that requires a different set of skills that unfortunately most of us haven't developed. This was actually found out through a study with the American Psychological Association by Dr. Ashley Abramson in this June 2020. She found that or the American Psychological Association found that kids are digital consumers. And being a consumer means it's a passive type of thing. You're consuming the technology. But to become a digital learner, that means you have to be proactive in order to seek out that knowledge. And so, like, we look and we see most of the kids that are behind now is because they're going through the motions of learning and not actual learning. So that's another thing we definitely have to look at. So, how does social distancing compare? What is the biblical view of social distancing? And I'll quote here Romans 13, chapter 1 through 7. Christians have a responsibility to obey the government as long as they tell us not to disobey God. So, in other words, what we are doing is following God's law by not allowing man to not disobeying what the government says because they're not contrary to God's law. So in other words, social distancing is God's way of preventing disease from being spread by listening to the government because it's not contradictory to God's law. And that's Romans chapter 13, verse 1 through 7. So what does the future hold for us? Well, social distancing, some aspects of this is going to stay, but we as humans seek that connection, and we are going to slowly but surely drift back to one another. We want to be around one another. But in the COVID-19 pandemic, social distancing was necessary to stop the spread of the disease, or to the very least slow it down. We're still in the middle of this pandemic, or we're still going through this pandemic, and we will see what are the things that remain as far as our social distancing, or will we seek that human connection? Because one thing about human growth and development, social distancing takes away or hampers our emotional intelligence. So we got to figure out the median between being distant from one another to stop the spread of disease and continuing to build strong relationships that builds up our emotional intelligence. Thank you.
COVID-19 isolation, mental health impact in the elderly. COVID-19 posed a great impact on America. We can say COVID-19 affected the world in some form or another, economically, socially, physically, emotionally, and mentally. We have studied the effects on education, adolescents, and young adults. But what about our elderly, our seniors? Our seniors are those who pleasured themselves in seeing family visit, those who love going to the senior group meetings or church activities, those in senior facilities that look forward to the visits of their loved ones. How has this isolation affected our elderly? Dr. Tepperton and Dr. Tomar from the Neurology and Psychiatry Department conducted a systematic search in Embase, Maryland, PubMed, and the Royal College of Psychiatrics website using a combination of free text terms. They searched for articles published between the years of 2000 and 2020, combining the terms mental health, mental disorder, loneliness, isolation, epidemic, and COVID-19. They conducted their research. According to the Office for National Statistics, the majority of the deaths involving COVID-19 has been among people aged 65 years and over. Of these, according in the over 85 years age of group. Social isolation and loneliness increases the risk of mental disorders in older people. Overwhelming feelings of isolation and loss of social relations have been shown to have implications for the decline in cognition, mood, and sensitivity to threat. They can also lead to build-up of cortisol concentration, worsening of immune functioning, sleep disruption, and increased body weight. Older people are particularly likely to experience changes like retirement, increased impediments such as poor vision and hearing, as well as bereavement, which are known to increase loneliness. This, when coupled with social disconnectedness caused due to the corona pandemic, where families could not meet their elderly relatives due to shielding, is likely to increase risk of perceived isolation, leading to an increased risk of depression and anxiety. The effects of social isolation will be more harshly experienced by the age group of the elders as a result of losing either temporarily, like admission to the hospital, or permanently, which is by death, friends or family in the same age group. Older people who lose their loved ones are more likely to experience complicated bereavement reactions, such as depression, post-traumatic stress disorders, and prolonged grief symptoms. The increased mental effect of social isolation of the elderly is experienced by increased loneliness, stress, depression, anxiety, and PTSD. What can we do to reduce the effects of social isolation during this pandemic? The WHO identified that older adults, especially in isolation, may require support to reduce levels of anxiety, stress, and agitation. Ways in which we can help is practical and emotional support through informal network and health professionals. Help the individual learn daily physical exercises that can be done in and at their homes. Encourage regular sleep routines and eating habits. Keep in touch with loved ones via phone, email, social media, or by the loved one making visits. Keep access to medications at least 2 weeks in supply. Ways we can help support the effort of elders staying well when social distancing. That's by contacting the individuals and allowing them to talk about their feelings and emotions to support well-being. Help the individual adapt activities to carry out in their home. Helping the individual to arrange to speak to someone, most days on the phone or via social media, such as Civil Line helplines, friends, family, church members, or locate a senior service or agency that will keep regular contact. Help them reduce or manage triggers. And those triggers are those things that will increase stress, depression, anxiety. Make a point to contact them by phone or social media. In an overview, we looked in further research will be required to ascertain how successful interventions have been to tackle social isolation in the specific circumstances brought about by the pandemic. We can say for sure the elderly are in need of our support and help, even though we are beginning to resume in functioning as a nation. There are many elders that are afraid to come out for fear of exposure to COVID-19. 1 Peter 3:8 says, "Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another, love as brothers, be tenderhearted, be courteous." Leviticus 19:32 says, "Who shall rise before the gray-headed and honor the presence of an old man and fear your God? I am the Lord." 1 Peter 5:5 says, "Likewise, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. Yes, all of you be submissive to one another, and be clothed with humility, for God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble." In conclusion, the relationship between environmental factors and intellectual skills suggests that with proper stimulation, practice, and motivation, older people can maintain their mental abilities. As Christian counselors, we can help bridge the gap for the elderly to help ensure their mental and physical wellness.
Hi everyone, my name is Pooja Bibe and I'm in group 2. For our group presentation, we decided to do COVID-19, and as we all know, what is COVID-19 and how it has affected each one of us. For my topic, I decided to do death and grief just because I have also personally experienced death and grief during this time, and I know what this topic means for me and for each one of us. So what is death and grief? Death is the absence of life, and grief is the emotional response to one's loss. There are multiple definitions of death and grief, but I found this is simple and really helpful. According to Gary Miller, grief is a reaction to a change or loss that is significant to the individual. In that way, it is a part of the person's healing process. It is a strong emotion that incorporates the feelings of helplessness and passivity, and an emotion that one cannot control. Death and grief during COVID-19. COVID-19, also known as the deadly coronavirus disease, has caused a significant loss, including lives, livelihoods, social, physical connections, our usual ways of life, and how we grapple with death and mourning. According to the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention's 3.84 million people have died due to coronavirus disease, and still people are facing deaths. The grief during COVID is not about losing loved ones, but people grieving lost routines, social connections, family structures, sense of security, unemployment, education, and freedom. Although grief is normal, COVID-19 has made the grieving process more difficult because of social isolation, and families cannot say goodbye and cannot participate in the mourning rituals. COVID-19 and its impacts. COVID-19 grief has left a negative impact on people physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. And these impacts includes a sense of disbelief, shock or denial, loss of sleep and appetite, sadness, anger, confusion, difficulty thinking clearly, sense of disconnection from others, yearning for longing, frequent thoughts and memories of the loved ones, addiction, depression. And as we all know, we all have went through kind of like this impacts, and it has impacted each one of us. Maybe it could be anger or sadness or addiction or depression. And this has really hit hard for the people, especially who has lost their loved ones. Developmental theoretical frameworks, implications of COVID-19. COVID-19 has impacted every individual in every aspect of the psychosocial, spiritual implications. The COVID-19 and its effects on the human body. COVID-19 effects on an individual and their coming to grips with sickness and their morality. Social, the impacts on human interactions with one another, circumstances, and isolations during a pandemic. Spiritual, using faith, spiritual experiences, and a higher level of consciousness to overcome challenges of COVID-19. According to Christian worldview, for people who experiences trauma and grief, spirituality and religion can be common vehicles that provide a sense of coherence and meaning to life. God is the source of support, and if God took away our grief, he would be taking away our love. Instead, he provides the help and strength we need each step of the way. God can redeem our pain and suffering and use it for our good. Those who believe in him have eternal life. Therapeutic treatment strategies and management techniques. Therapeutic treatment strategies, role-playing, cognitive behavioral strategies, grief therapy, early recollections, social skills training, narrative truth, mindfulness-based practices to manage distress. Some management techniques can be honoring the relationship, but moving on in life, recognizing that the grief may resurface, journaling, practicing rituals, encourage connectedness, exercise routine, and self-care, grief support groups. Treatments and its effectiveness. According to Gary Miller, the above techniques helps the clients through the grief process. And I would like to go back to the early slide where it says honoring the relationship but moving on in life. And it can be difficult in that moment, but I believe that losing our loved ones can be really hard and tough, but just honoring the relationship with other people around us can help us to move in our life. And then just journaling, write it down, whatever our heart is feeling, that will be helpful for the clients. And practicing rituals and also encouraging connectedness, helping our clients to get back to the world or to the communities, and the social life, getting back to the social life can really help. And taking care of self, also exercising and going for walks or doing something fun or just being in the nature can really help. And then again, the groups, support groups can really help to cope with the grief and death. The therapeutic techniques assist people to know the real meaning of relationship and life. Therapeutic relationship can provide a safe place to recognize one's life story. The loss of relationship may change our self-narrative and strain our sense of identity in relation to our connection with others. In conclusion, I would say that grief is a part of life, and it is okay to grieve. Though grief is difficult, it helps to recognize that it's natural and useful. Grief brings an individual to know the real meaning of life. It is necessary to seek help. Thank you.